Tableau fanaticism really started to grow over the last year and a half. And he attended Tableau Conference 2017 and became a Tableau Desktop Qualified Associate. He also spends a lot of free time on Tableau challenges. A fan of mentoring other Tableau users, please give Paul a shout out if you'd like some help. Hello, free time. So in today's short session, he's going to share some of his tips on demystifying LODs. A warm welcome to the Tableau Fringe Festival to you, Paul.
Thanks so much, and spot on the name pronunciation. So that.
Yay!
All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Let me minimize this. Okay, great. So welcome everyone to Demystifying LODs. I'm going to be teaching you today about how and when to use level of detail calculations. I'm grateful for you to be at my presentation today. There are a lot of great speakers coming up after me, so make sure to stick around for the rest of the Fringe Festival. A few things before I get started. I will be taking questions at the end, so if you do have any questions, make sure to put them into the Q&A box on Zoom, and I'll get to those at the end. You could also follow up with me on Twitter at Paul Wachtler PMP. And if you'd like a copy of the presentation that I'm about to give, it's published up on my Tableau public profile. So let's get started. There's a lot to cover in 30 minutes, so I'm not going to be able to cover everything on LODs, but at the very least, these are the three things that you'll be able to take away from this presentation. So the first one is being able to define what an LOD is. The second is explaining what each of the three types of LODs are and how they're used. And third, and most important, be able to use LODs effectively in your work. Now, I'm sure there's some of you out there who might have Googled how to use an LOD. Maybe you copied and pasted it into your workbook. Maybe it even works, but if you're not sure how it works, that's going to come back to hurt you. You may have a colleague or a boss or a client come to you and ask you how a calculation's working, and if you can't answer that, that's going to get you in trouble. So at the end of this presentation, as it pertains to LODs, you will be able to use them effectively in your work and explain how they're working. So let's talk a little bit about levels and how calculations are performed in Tableau. So there are two main ways that Tableau performs calculations. The first is a row level calculation, and you could think of this like a row in a spreadsheet where you have a row of values, you might have a dimension and some measures in that same row. If you want to add two of those measures together, you don't need an aggregation in Tableau. That is a row level calculation. Now, the next type is a view level calculation, and these are where your aggregations come into play. So if you want to use sum, average, max, min, or any of the others, that is an aggregation, and Tableau calculates aggregations at the lowest level of detail in the view. And I'm going to come back to this a few times throughout the presentation. I really want to make sure this point sticks. That Tableau calculates aggregations at the lowest level of detail in your view. Now, what does lowest level mean? Let me get into how levels work here. So on the right, you'll see an example of a geographical hierarchy of information. So at the top here, you have the continents at the highest level. At the lowest level, you have the address. And aggregations can be performed at any of these levels, but again, by default, Tableau is going to perform that aggregation at the lowest level of detail. So as an example, let's say you take the state dimension and you place that on your row shelf, and then you place a measure on your marks card, let's say profit, and so the profit is going to be calculated at this state level. If you then take your city dimension, you place that next to state, now your lowest level of detail is at the city, so that aggregation is going to occur at the city level, because again, that is the lowest level of detail. So this diagram shows you what impacts levels in your view. Placing a dimension in any of the areas with an outline here will impact your level of detail. So obviously placing something on the columns or the row shelf or directly in the view is going to impact your level of detail. But pay attention to the marks cards on the side here, because placing a dimension on these marks cards may also impact your level of detail, and you may not directly see them in your view, especially the detail mark card. So if you have aggregations and you think they're not at the right level, you think something's off, take a look at your marks card, see what dimensions you have placed there. You may be at a different level than you think you are. Lastly, on this slide, the filter section is not circled here, but depending on the type of filters that you're using and depending on the LOD type of calculations that you're using, the order of operations of Tableau will come into play as to what is processed first. So I'm going to go into that in a little bit here, give you some examples of, depending on your filters, depending on your level of detail calculations that may impact how your calculations are processed. So as you know, LOD stands for level of detail. If you're at the lowest level of detail in Tableau and you want to aggregate at another level, the way to do that is with a level of detail calculation. So this is what's going to allow you to perform an aggregation at another level that's not the lowest level. So let's take a look at this example on the right here as I explain the 3 different types of LODs. So the first type is a fixed LOD, and this is going to fix the calculation at the level that you specify. So in that example that I had earlier, where you had state on your row shelf, you put city on your row shelf. Now say you want to come up and do a calculation at the country level. A simple way to do that is to use a fixed LOD. You could fix your level of detail at the country level and then perform an aggregation there. The next type of LOD is an exclude. This will remove any number of levels that you include. So in this case, if you're at the city level and you say exclude city, it's going to move you 1 level up to the state. Include works similarly to exclude, it's just going in the opposite order. So if you're at the city level and you include the address, that's going to come down 1 level so you can do calculations at the address. Now, as I explain the syntax for LODs, definitely pay attention because the syntax for level of detail calculations is different than most other types of calculations in Tableau. The first major difference you'll notice is the curly brackets on the outside here. So don't use regular parentheses. You want to make sure to enclose it in the curly brackets. And the first part of the calculation is going to be your LOD type. So fixed, exclude, include. This example down here at the bottom, you're fixing at the country level. So the second part of the LOD is the dimension or dimensions. You can have more than one that you like to either fix, exclude, or include. So in this case, as in the example on the right, if you're at the city, you're going to fix at the country level. So this means your aggregations are going to be done at the country level. And then you have this little colon here, so don't forget that. That's what breaks up the level of detail that you're fixing at and the aggregation that you want to perform. So on the aggregation side of that colon, you have your aggregation, which in this case is sum, and you have your measure value, which is profit. So what this is saying is you're fixing at the country level of detail, you're taking the sum of profit for that country. Okay, so let's talk about some levels in action here. I'm going to jump into some examples, show you how levels work and how these level of detail calculations work. I'm going to jump out of presentation mode here, and we'll go into this worksheet. So this is the world indicators extract data. This comes default installed with Tableau. So if you have Tableau installed on your machine, you already have this data set ready to go. Now, this is a very simple viz here. There's a few dimensions going on and a measure value, so I'll point out what we have working here. The first is the region. So this is your dimension. This is the current level of detail of this view is the region. It is both the lowest level of detail, but in this case, it's the only level of detail at the moment. Now, I have a measure value, which is population total, and that's showing the population for each region. You will notice I do have this GDP measure value here. It's actually hidden, and that is just to be able to show the population total title. It's just a way of showing a title for one measure for one column in Tableau. So you'd see if I took off the GDP, it gets rid of the title. So I have that hidden there, not impacting the level of detail, not impacting the view. The last thing I have on the view here is this year filter. Now, there are 12 years of data in this data set. Selected the latest year, which is 2012. You'll see if I remove 2012, it'll give you the total for each region for the 12 years of data. So we're going to keep that on there. All right, so now I'm going to add the country dimension here to the row value, and you'll see it goes from calculating at the region level of detail. Now country becomes the lowest level of detail, and as you scroll down, every single country has its population total calculated for it, which is great. That's what you expect. In this case, country is now your lowest level of detail. But what if you would like to still see the region population total, even though you're at the country level of detail? So that is where your level of detail calculations are going to come into play. So I have this region population calculation here. I'll show you how this works. So I have two different ways of making this work here. The first one is by using an exclude LOD. So you're at the country level. This is saying you're going to exclude the country, so you're going to move up one level, which is going to be region, and then you're going to take the sum of the population total for that region. So let's drop that onto measure values. You'll see now you have the same numbers as before for each region, where it's calculating the population total for that region by excluding the country level of detail. Now, you could also do this with a fixed level of detail, and this is where your order of operations come into play. So just for the fixed level of detail type, they're going to get processed before your dimension filters. So this year filter right here is a dimension filter. This fixed LOD is going to be processed before it. So in this case, I have to include both the year and the region. And as I mentioned, you can have multiple levels of detail that you're fixing at. So I'm using the year, which in this case is going to be 2012, and the region to figure out the population total. Now I'll hit apply and show you that the values stay the same. And if you're wondering why you can't just fix at the region, I'll show you when you remove the year, it's not going to take this filter into account. It's processing the fixed LOD prior to the year filter being processed. So you're seeing the total population across all 12 years, which is not what you want. So if you fix at the year and then the region, it's actually processing this before the dimension filter. The dimension filter is coming in after the fact to say, just give me 2012. And so for 2012, this is what the fixed LOD had calculated. Okay, great. So let's say now you want to move up to a higher level. Well, what's higher than region? So above region, in this case, we're looking at the world. So what is the total population of the world, which is really the total of each region's population. Again, looking at 2012 data. So I have this world population calculation here. And the first way of doing this is to fix at the year, again, because this is going to be processed before the dimension filter. So fixing at the year, taking the sum of the population total. So we're basically disregarding region, disregarding country, just for the year, what is the total population? And you'll see when I drag that onto my view here, that is the same value for every single region, every single country in this data set. There is a second way to do this, and this is going to come with a little change in filters here, and again, it goes back to the order of operations. So a fixed level of detail calculation does come, or does get processed rather, before a dimension filter. However, if you change this dimension filter to a context filter, that's going to get processed before. So I have a little trick in here for fixed LODs. If you do not include any dimension, this is going to automatically fix your level of detail at the highest possible level of detail in your view. So again, in this example, you get rid of country, you get rid of region, and as it stands right now, you'd also be getting rid of year. So what this is going to show you when I apply this is going to show you the population for the world across all 12 years, which isn't what you want because we want to look at 2012. So what you can do if you want to use the highest level of detail here, change your filter to a context filter by going, again, I don't know if that was too quick, but you can just go into your filter right here, the drop down, click add to context. Now it's going to become a context filter, and your context filter is going to be processed before any of your level of detail calculations. So what this is doing, it's filtering down the data to 2012 first, and your LOD saying at the highest level of the data, after it's been filtered for 2012, then take the sum of the population total. So again, depending on what types of filters you have, depending on the types of LODs you're using, the processing and order of operations may be different, so definitely keep that in mind. Let's jump into a couple of examples here. So,
sorry to interrupt, it's Fee
yes.
here.
Yeah.
I just have some issues when you're showing calcs.
So what's happening is you can only see it when it's moving around. By chance, when you shared the screen, did you share the full desktop?
No, you know what? Let me go back and do that.
Thank you.
No problem. All right. You know what? Let me go back then real fast. I'll just run through that quickly. Can you actually let me drop the world or the region population on here? I'll show you the calculation again. So let me go here. All right. Can you see that now?
Yeah.
All right, perfect, perfect. So I'll just quickly talk through again what I did. The first option is this exclude country, and that's going to take you up one level to the region. The second way of doing this, because you're using a fixed LOD, and that is going to be processed before your dimension filter if you're using a dimension filter. So you're fixing at the year and then the region to take the sum of the population total. And for the world population here, that's calculating the total world right now. Because I have the dimension filter, the fixed LOD is going to be processed before the dimension filter. So in the first example here, when I'm fixing at the year, that will show you for 2012 at the level of 2012, what is your sum of population total? Now, if I show you here, so this is what I was talking about where you don't need a dimension in your LOD. If you say fixed and then nothing after it, this is going to fix it at the highest level of your view, which in this case is going to be the world. However, if I do that again without having this as a context filter, if this is a dimension filter, this is going to be processed before the dimension. So if you do want to use the highest level in this case, you could change your filter to a context filter by clicking Add to Context. That is going to make sure the filter is processed before your fixed or any other level of detail calculation. So again, just make sure you're aware of what types of filters you're using, what types of LODs you're using to be aware of the processing and how that works. So jump into an example of a fixed LOD here. You'll see this is a customer cohort analysis. Now, customer cohort analysis is basically breaking a group of customers into a cohort, which is a group based on any dimensions that you define. So this is using the wonderful Superstore dataset that also comes by default with your Tableau install. And you'll see here I have the order date, or rather the year of the order date, at the bottom. And then on the left side, you have the profit. So showing not only the profit by year, it's also breaking down each individual year by customer acquisition year. So this is the date that a customer first made a purchase. And the reason you might want to look at this is for customer retention and seeing how your customer base is growing from previous years. So in 2015, you only have customers for 2015, so you'll see the profit for them in that year. You move to 2016, you still have your customers that first purchased in 2015 as a group, and you could see their profit went up slightly, and now you have your 2016 cohort in here as well, which actually, if you followed the 2016 cohort across, you could see that in 2017, the profit actually went down a little bit. 2018, the 2016 cohort profit went back up. So it's a great way of identifying groups of customers and making sure your customers are being retained and that you're not losing old customers. So let's jump into how this was created. So really the trick here is that I'm using an LOD to color the bars by the customer acquisition year. So if I take off the color, you'll see this is a very standard bar chart. Again, you have the order date on the bottom, profit on the left side. You can see profit increasing each year. But in this view, you can't see that the customers from 2016 went down in 2017 profit-wise. So that's where the LOD and the calculation help to point out some things that you can't see here. So I have this customer acquisition date calculation. And very simply, what I'm doing is I'm fixing at the customer ID level. So this is for each individual customer in the Superstore data set. I am fixing at that level of detail and taking the minimum order date. So this is the first date that each customer placed in order. And this is going to give you an exact date, but what you really want here is the year of this minimum date so that you could group the customers by the year that they first purchased. So very simply, I'm going to take this customer acquisition date, I'm going to drop it onto color, it's going to change it into the cohort view. I'm just going to do a reverse sort on the color here so that you get the latest years at the top. And there you go. Now you can see your customer breakout. You can see how your customer cohorts are doing each year and see maybe you need to reach out to some older customers if they're not purchasing anymore. All right, so let's jump into another example here for an exclude level of detail calculation. Now, this is what we call the DMV area. This is the Maryland, DC, Virginia area. This is the area I live in, so that's why I picked it. Still using the Superstore data set here, and this is showing two things. So if you hover over a state, you'll see the average sales that that state has made for cities in that state. So Virginia has 5906 in sales average. Maryland is 3607. And what I'm doing is for each city here, I'm coloring it by whether that city has below average or above average sales as compared to the average for the state. So you see Richmond has below average sales. If I go up to Springfield here, that's above average sales. So I will jump in here and show you how I built this. Now, this is a dual axis map. So very simply, if I drag off this latitude here, you'll see that you just have the map of the states. I'm filtered on just Maryland, DC, and Virginia here in my state filter. And if you go to map layers at the top, I have everything unchecked. So you just get very simply the outlines here. I also, as a style note, I added a border, just added the black border. You can see it adds a little more pop to have the border around the outside. So a very simple way of creating the city view here. If you're on a PC, you could hold down the Control key. If you're on a Mac, you hold down the Command key, and you just drag latitude over. And by holding the Command or the Control key, you're duplicating a field, and that works with any of your fields and any of your views. So now you can see you have two state views here, and you're going to go down to the second mark that you just duplicated. You see it's at the state level of detail. So on your detail column, you have state. You're going to drop city onto detail. And now you're going to see the locations of each city. So like you would with any other dual axis chart, you click here on your second latitude, select dual axis. That's going to overlay the cities over the states. As you can see now, it's gray. Doesn't really help you much. You can't really see much. You can change the color to blue, so maybe you could see this, where the cities are. But again, it's not giving you any comparison or telling you how the cities are doing in sales. I'm going to change the mark type for the cities to a circle, so I can adjust the size here, make it a little bit larger to make it stand out more. All right, so there are two parts to the level of detail calculations here, or rather, two calculations you're going to use to be able to color the city. So the first is you need to calculate the average state sales, and this is where your level of detail calculations are going to come into play. So I'm using exclude here. The first part is excluding the city, so your lowest level of detail in this view is the city. You're saying exclude the city, so you're going to move up to the state level, take the sum of sales for the city. So that, or sorry, for the state, because you're excluding city, that's going to give you the total sales for each state. And you're dividing by, again, you're excluding the city, so moving up to the state level, the number of cities in that state, the count distinct of the number of cities in that state. So you're dividing the total sales for the state by the number of cities in the state. That's going to give you the average state sales for cities in each state. Now, what you need to do is compare the sales for the city against that state average. So how do you do that? I have this above average sales calculation here. And what it's saying is it's comparing the sum of sales. So remember, your lowest level of detail in Tableau is what's going to be used here because I'm not using an LOD. So your lowest level of detail is the city level. So at the city level, are the sum of sales lower than the average sales for that state? If they are, then no, because they're not above average sales. If this is greater than average sales, then yes, they do have above average sales. I simply need to take that above average sales calculation, drop it onto color, and now you can see that it's coloring below average sales and above average sales based on the average sales for that state. So I'm going to jump back into presentation mode here. When you're using LODs, really, practice makes perfect. As with anything in Tableau, the more you use it, the more comfortable you get, the easier it's going to get over time, the better you're going to become at them. So always, always, always strive to understand what your calculations are doing. It's super important. As I said, you don't want your boss to come to you, ask you a question on what a calculation's doing and not have an answer. That just doesn't end well. So always strive to understand what your calculations are doing. And very importantly, be the expert on your own work. Don't expect others to understand what your view is doing, what your calculations are doing if you don't understand it. So not only do you need to be able to understand it, you need to be able to explain it to others as well. And so when it comes to LODs, make sure to ask yourself if you really need to use an LOD. It's very convenient, or you find yourself after you learn LODs to want to use them all the time. And I myself was certainly guilty of this. But again, go look at your lowest level of detail. You may not need an LOD calculation. If you are at the lowest level of detail in your view, and that's where you're going to do the calculation, you don't need an LOD because they do require additional processing. If you have a lot of LODs in a workbook, it may impact the performance and slow it down. So just before you use an LOD, do a quick check. Make sure if you really need one. You only need it if you're at the lowest level of detail and you want to move to a different level. And then most importantly, help others how to learn LODs too. You are now familiar with how to use them. You can use them effectively in your work. The most important next step, and really the embodiment of the Tableau community, is to go out, help others learn, and you're really going to get better at your own craft, get better at data visualization and using Tableau as you help others learn. So I'm now going to jump into the Q&A window to look at some questions. Just a quick reminder, you can also reach out to me directly on Twitter at Paul Wachtler PMP. All right. So let's, I'm just going to look at this. Oh, thanks, V. Do you want to read the questions?
Yeah, so I've just got, so there's one question in the Q&A, and I've got a little bit more background into it. So, so first of all, thank you so much for a great presentation. LODs are things that people get so afraid maybe of stepping into, but once you've nailed it, oh my God, it'll make your life so much better. So I really appreciate you sharing the story there. So the question is, when you first start out in Tableau, how do you know where to go and find data sets? I think that you mentioned Superstore, and perhaps you can show where people can access Superstore from on the screen.
Yeah, so it's a little different because I'm using a Mac here and I've got Zoom controls in the way, but you're going to go to your Tableau repository, which on this Mac, it's going to be in Documents, My Tableau repository. I believe if you're on a PC, you go under Documents, and same thing, you're going to have a My Tableau repository folder. You look generally for the latest version of Tableau you have installed. You just click down, and then you'll see your data sources there. So I use this World Indicators Hyper Extract here, and using the Superstore dataset right here.
Great. And are there any other tips and tricks on where else to find data?
I mean, there's data everywhere. Sometimes it's fun just to get inspired on your own and find data in the wild. Sometimes you could just search online for data sets. Kaggle is a great resource for finding data sets. They have plenty of data out there, open use data sets. Any of the Tableau challenges, Makeover Monday, Workout Wednesday, they'll give you data sets to use, so those are great. And yeah, I mean, it's really fun. Sometimes you just get inspired in the wild to take a data set and do what you want to do with it. So if you're inspired, take it, run with it, and share it.
Great news. And we have another live question here.
Sure.
So I wanted to ask you, what do you think, like in your experience, which LOD example or scenario did you find to be the most easily relatable to an LOD newbie, let's just say?
Sure. So the customer cohort analysis, especially if you're doing anything in the sales arena, any VP of finance or your sales manager is going to want to see how your customers are doing each year and how your customer retention is doing. So that's a nice, quick, easy way to show them. They'll probably be impressed that you're able to split out the bars like that because they've probably only seen single color bars before. So that's a really simple, easy one to do. But again, don't start throwing LODs everywhere. Make sure you need them.
It's more like, yeah, knowing when to use what, essentially.
Exactly.
I thoroughly enjoyed that presentation. So
thank you so much.
I think we're moving on.
Thank you so much for your time, Paul. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Cheers.